Virginia Woolf. For most of history, Anonymous was a woman. This history is a record of events as viewed through the male lens, about the male experience and in the male voice, and describes what are essentially the activities and interests of men. It subverts women's intelligence and does little justice to their contributions and importance. The aim of my talk is to challenge this original version of history, and to this end, I will begin by discussing the ways that HISstory has represented women, and then move on to exploring HERstory and giving a voice to women's special place in the evolution and history of humankind. In the words of historian Mary Writer Beard, the dogma of women's complete historical subjection to men must be rated as one of the most fantastic myths ever created by the human mind. It is a history that has followed our culture's ideological bias and is founded on a patriarchal structure of society, which we all know is a male construct, and which has promoted a version of a preferred feminine ideal that is derogatory and restraining. As such, it has perpetuated a place for females in history that is secondary or complementary to that of males, and the few women who do make it into this narrative are usually depicted in certain prescribed, stereotypical ways. The first chapter of HISstory begins with prehistory in its Greek myth and legendary form. This oral tradition usually depicts the female figure as demure, faithful, long-suffering, respectful and self-sacrificing, which are considered the more natural and preferred, or unruly, bewitching and unmanageable, instinctively dangerous, wicked and flawed, and as such, needing to be suppressed, controlled, managed or punished. We start with Penelope at the loom. In Homer and the Odyssey, we see Telemachus, the son of Odysseus in Book 1, telling his mother Penelope to be silent. I quote, "You should go and take care of your work, spinning and weaving. Speaking is for men, for all men, but for me especially, since I am master of this house." Here Penelope is presented as the ideal, submissive, dutiful and devoted wife and mother. Oh, what happened? Okay. Next we have Scylla with her dog's heads and Medusa with her snakes, both depicted as the quintessential nasty, deadly and dangerous monster women who defy the norm and must be vanquished in order to restore the balance of power. Medusa is killed by Perseus and Scylla by Heracles, two of the greatest heroes of all time, who in their valorous actions are highlighting men's fear of women's power and normalising gender violence in the process. The next chapter of HISstory moves from the mythical to the real women, where we find that intelligent and creative women usually had their contributions undermined, disparaged, and often destroyed. One example of many is Sappho, the celebrated poet of Mytilene, born in Lesbos around 630 BC. In her poetry, she celebrated women's existence. Those who study her poems say she had a refreshingly different way of looking at the world. Her love poetry explores individual identity and personal emotions, and speaks of the spirit of humanity in a way that confronted many male conservatives of the time. In a world dominated by male voices, where men more often excelled and were taken seriously, she gave voice to the silent realm of women. And for her efforts, scandalous stories were circulated about her that denigrated her work. That she was promiscuous, that she was a prostitute, that she was a lesbian. Gregory the theologian allegedly was said to have ordered all her work destroyed. We next move to the historical writings of prominent scholars and scientists who throughout HISstory have usually depicted women as being physically weak, emotionally unstable, or intellectually ill-equipped to contribute in any meaningful way. One example is Martin Luther and his musings from Table Talk, a collection of his conversations. He was a German priest born in 1483 and widely regarded as one of the most influential figures in Western and Christian history. One of his pearls of wisdom is as follows. Men have broad and large chests and small narrow hips and more understanding than women, who have but small and narrow breasts and broad hips. To that end, they should remain at home, sit still, keep house, and bear and bring up children. Next, we have Galen of Pergamon, a surgeon and philosopher who was born in 129 AD. Galen, while affirming a place for women in the reproductive cycle, went to great lengths to point out that she was still less perfect than the man in this process. I quote, "The female is less perfect than the male for one principal reason." Wait for it. She is colder. He went on to add that heat is nature's primary instrument, and that makes the man more perfect than the woman, with his sperm being warmer, stronger, and more perfect. Now, despite the fact that women have been depicted and written about in this way, it is a fundamental error to conceptualise them as such. HERstory gleams that women have been there from the beginning, and it is an undisputed fact that they have been actors and agents in the evolution and history of humankind. They have been essential and vital, and their contributions have been invaluable in our emergence and survival as a civilization and as a species. HERstory is about restoring women to their rightful place in the evolutionary and reproductive story, starting where it all begins, at conception with the mitochondrial DNA. Current research and scientific evidence has provided insight into the principle that mitochondrial DNA, the distinct genetic code that serves as the powerhouse of every cell in the body, is exclusively passed down by the female. It is true that we inherit half the DNA from our fathers and half from our mothers, but this applies to nuclear DNA. The mitochondrial DNA is found in the cytoplasm and is exclusive to the female and provides genetic material that is vitally important in the reproductive process. The story of the mitochondrion is a story of a matrilineal lineage. It is passed down from mother to daughter and connects all women to a common female ancestor, and it is lost when women birth only sons. HERstory is about acknowledging that behind every woman is her sacred female bloodline that connects women through the generations. HERstory is also about understanding the unique bond that women have that unites 3 generations of females in an exclusive way. Did you know that all the eggs a woman will ever carry form in her ovaries when she is a 4-month-old fetus in the womb of her mother? This means our cellular life as as an egg, begins in the womb of our grandmother. Each of us spent 5 months in our grandmother's womb and she in turn within the womb of her grandmother. This matrilineal connection is truly unique, special, and worth acknowledging. Moving on to the next phase. HERstory is about challenging the idea that men have always had the power and control. Prehistoric evidence, guided by a new consciousness and recent findings, supports the idea of our civilization having a matrilineal beginning before moving into a patriarchal one. Between 30,000 to 50,000 years ago, life for women was matrilineal, with the lineage and descent of their offspring passing through the mother's line. The conception and birth of children was considered a magical power vested in women. Since it was only possible to know who one's mother was, children derived their identity from their mothers. Women were not bound to particular men through marriage, and they had control over their bodies and freedom to live as they pleased. These early societies were based on equality and cooperation, where men and women coexisted in partnership and worked together in hunting, gathering, and small-scale cultivation of the land. They lived and worked together according to the cycles of the seasons and not to gender norms. Maria Gimbutas, an archaeologist and anthropologist, recorded the cultures of the Neolithic world of old Europe and proposed that these were egalitarian and communal societies in which women were respected, revered, and highly visible as recently as 6,500 BC. She advocated that in these pre-patriarchal societies, the concept of the divine took the female form, a multidimensional female deity who unified all natural things as a metaphor for Earth's powers. She was the ancestral mother, the creator of life, the creator of us all. In these earliest societies, the mother goddess or Earth Mother was revered. Now, whilst it is difficult to know exactly what these early people thought, there is nevertheless a rich repertoire of predominantly female figurines from that period that supports the notion of a female-centric element being present in this society. One specific example is the female figurine discovered in Willendorf in Austria. One of the oldest representations of female form, it is estimated to have been made in Paleolithic times between 28,000 to 25,000 BC. It depicts a voluptuous female figure with large breasts and a stomach that hangs over an emphasised pubic area. This figure is considered to be depicting the ritual of fertility, pregnancy, and birth. Next, HERstory is about tracing the way that society slowly evolved from a matrilineal to a patriarchal one, and how gender norms were created. Around 9,000 to 6,000 years ago, society gradually moved into developing agriculture and domesticating animals. With this came the notion of possession of land, animals, and eventually ownership and control of women. Men needed to ensure that their offspring inherited their property, and there was a need to control the reproductive capabilities of women to ensure this. This was the beginning of the power shift from the female to the male, and we now slowly begin moving into a patriarchal notion of the family, with the man at the head, and eventually the institutions of marriage, religion, and the law supporting and perpetuating this unit. In this society as it developed, men needed to defend, control, and protect what was theirs. Norms of masculinity, such as valorising the martial qualities of aggression, bravery in battle, courage in the face of danger, domination of others, were validated. On the other hand, for the women, norms of femininity were encouraged, which consisted of dependency, submissiveness, chastity, vulnerability, and limited or controlled mobility. Thus, the conversion of biological sexes into socially constructed genders was slowly consolidated, and with it, the subordination of women, and, lo and behold, gender discrimination was born. This new social structure robbed women of their freedom, autonomy, and control over their own bodies, as well as their intellect and rightful place in society and history. Women were no longer the vessel of nature creating man. Now man created woman as a vessel for himself. Now don't think women took this lying down, literally or figuratively. With the triumph of patriarchy, the first feminists were born. Her story is about highlighting the ways that women have always resisted this process, perceived its injustices, spoken out against it, and have often been punished severely for not conforming to it. One such attempt at silencing and punishing women has been the witch hunts. HISstory has a record of witches 5 centuries ago who were burnt at the stake or drowned in large numbers. They are described as being depraved and morally corrupt women who had made a pact with the devil. These poor women were subjected to horrible trials and tribulations, often resulting in their death. But HERstory tells us that these women were mostly wise women, midwives and healers, most likely intelligent, outspoken and independent women, women who did not conform to society's expectations and whose behaviours and ideas challenged the existing norms and threatened the power base of the patriarchal order. And for this, they were persecuted, ostracised, and often killed. I am sure that some of us in this room today might very well have suffered a similar fate for our headstrong and outspoken nature had we been around in those days. So where to now? HERstory is about questioning the reliability of HISstory, both in its primary and secondary sources. It is about removing the gender bias and searching those androcentric narratives for clues to a history that can restore women and do justice to their place in this story. The Ishago bone is a perfect example of this. Discovered in 1950 in the Congo and thought to be around 25,000 years old. It has certain markings which for many years were perceived to be part of a male tally chart. But in 1991, Claudia Zaslavsky, an academic ethnomathematician, suggested that it may very well have been used by a woman to keep track of her menstrual cycle. Sandy Toksvig, an activist, tells us about her experience in relation to this. I quote, "When I was a student at Cambridge, I remember an anthropology professor holding a picture of a bone with 28 incisions carved in it. This is often considered to be man's first attempt at a calendar," she explained. She paused as we dutifully wrote this down. "My question to you is this: what man needs to mark 28 days? I would suggest that this is a woman's attempt at a calendar." Now, whilst this is something that cannot be proven conclusively, it does nevertheless highlight how easy it has been for women's contributions to be overlooked. Most historians now agree that the image of women in the past has been severely distorted or totally ignored by generations of predominantly male 19th century archaeologists and historians. HERstory is about rewriting the history books. One such example is Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh of New Kingdom Egypt, was denied the title of warrior pharaoh because she was a woman, and her role was interpreted by the male, mostly British archaeologists of the time as being one of beautifying Egypt and focusing on internal building campaigns and other suitably womanly things, and certainly not of expanding and maintaining the empire, which had been the focus of all the male pharaohs who came before and after her. This all changed after the 1980s, when the archaeological evidence was re-examined and it was determined that she too had been an active and successful warrior pharaoh in her own right and entitled to be remembered as such. And new history books were written to reflect this. HERstory is also about recognising and valuing the important stories that women can tell in their handiwork, handicraft and traditional costumes. These elements of their culture and tradition are vital vessels for understanding important aspects of their everyday lives, of their history and of their role in the community. Recently, I was part of a research project that involved the study of the Castelloresian women's traditional costume. This turned out to be an amazing journey into the psyche of women who lived over a century ago on a tiny island off the coast of Asia Minor. Studying their traditional costume provided a window into their life and culture and gave us information about their role and place in the society and the history of their community. HERstory is about embracing our collective power for challenging and reforming. In the words of Louise M. Paré, the world is remade through the power of fierce women performing outrageous acts of creative rebellion. There have been many such women and social movements they have instigated in this process. One such woman was Kalliroi Tsiganou Paren, a prominent Greek feminist, political reformer and philanthropist who spearheaded the feminist movement in Greece and established the Likion Ellinidon, a prominent women's organisation that continues her work today. Her focus was the emancipation of women through education, work and the vote. So it can be said that we are in the throes of a movement and a process where women are not only transforming the past and the present, but also laying foundations for the future. In this process, HERstory is about challenging the conventional paradigms. In the words of Australia's very own wise woman, Margaret Whitlam, we must write our own history, reform our language, keep our own names, live our own lives, redefine our God, make our own laws, learn to defend ourselves, demand and get control of our bodies, and affirm that it is feminine to think. HERstory also involves expanding the human lens of history to become more inclusive. History is no longer his story, but the story of humankind in all its intersectional shapes, forms and sizes. It is a story that unites us all. So let's be inspired by the solidarity of women and our shared story. Let's embrace what unites us and continue building her future story. And in the words of Famzile Mambo Nkuka, a South African politician and former United Nations official, together we will build the society that we want. It is not yet time to rest. We have a lot of work to do. Thank you.